Good morning, everyone. Oh, let me just save that. Cool. God, which camera are we on? This one. Morning, everyone. Welcome back to Microscopy Live. As always, I'm Jen. This is my colleague Cesca. And today we're going to share with you our favorite bits of electron microscopy, which is meteorites.
Yes.
So we've got lots of new people today for Microscopy Live, so thank you very much for coming along. We're really, really grateful. So just kind of like general house rules. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Ask questions whenever you like. If there's something you want us to explain in more detail or something that you particularly want us to look at, let us know. We'll do our best to answer it and make sure that you get to see the bits of science that you're interested in. So we'll do like a little bit of a run through about how electron microscopy works, and we'll jump in with some Mars.
Yes, we
I do large asteroids, so I've got one of my rocks in there. But more excitingly, the winner of the quiz for August, was it August?
August, yeah. August 2022.
A long time ago, for our ice cream special. It was Jeremy, so I've already been in touch and we'll get his prize sent out to him hopefully later today.
Yeah.
But the prize for this month, which will be attached to the summary booklet you get later today, is, as always, one of our tote bags. And I've got a lens cloth, a different lens cloth, the special Joel lens cloth. So we're partnered with Joel, they're supporting Microscopy Live. So we've got their nice Hokusai ones as well as the Rockamara ones. You'll see our little mascot in the corner there. We have one of our notebooks, our notepads. I've got a Joel branded sketchbook for the Neoscope, which is normally what we do Microscopy Live on, but we thought today we'd show off one of our new bits of kit instead. It's a little bit bigger, a little bit more powerful. Just an assortment of pens, because you can never really have enough.
Have too many pens.
And a pencil for good measure, and a Joel USB stick. So the link to the quiz will be sent out later today with the summary booklet, with the link to the video as well. And then we'll be announcing the winner in November.
Yeah.
So it'll be last Friday of the month in November, which I think is the 25th. Yeah, 25th. And we're going to be looking at mushrooms, fungus, so it's thematically themed. I will send out an announcement when that is all alive and ready for registrations. So keep an eye on our social medias. You can follow us all on the lab. I think we're just EMC_Clemuni, but all that will be sent out today as well with everything else.
Yes, it will indeed. This session is also recorded. So at the end, if you want to rewatch it, or if people couldn't make it today, then it will be available on our YouTube channel later today.
Well, indeed. That's the stage. We get started with some
science. Ado, yes. Should we start with the microscope?
Yes, we will introduce you to one of our new bits. Okay, actually, let's see if I can spin around over here.
Here we go.
Hey, Jessica, do you want to introduce us to the IT800?
Yes, so this is one of our new field emission electron microscopes, the IT800 that we bought from Joel, UK. And it's a really cool microscope. We've really been enjoying using it.
I'm a big fan.
Yeah, it's very fun. So at the top of the microscope up here is our source, and that's where the electron beam is coming from. It's shooting down the column and going through a range of apertures until you get to our specimen chamber, which is where our meteorites currently are. We've got the exchange chamber here and a rod that basically lets you move the samples between the two.
So because this is a high vacuum system, we have a little airlock on the front. So that specimen chamber is basically like a mini vacuum chamber, which then means we can safely move things into the big vacuum chamber, which is kept at -10⁴ pascals, I think it is. It's barely anything in there. But that's why we keep this one sort of, we're a little bit fussy about what goes into it, because the last thing we want to be doing is putting stuff that flies around in the chamber in there.
Yeah.
So today we will be spinning back around so you can see both of us. Hello again. So today we're going to be doing some imaging and hopefully some compositional analysis. So electron microscopy is really good because using electrons, we can not only look at very small things, but we can also tell you what they're made out of, which for us as geologists and planetary geologists is really, really important. If you know what a mineral is made up out of, you can sort of start reconstructing a geological history of these things. So we use our knowledge from terrestrial geology and we apply that to space rocks.
Yeah.
So let's start sharing some of the many screens we have going today.
Here we go.
Share that one?
Okay, yeah, perfect.
Cool. I will let you, I'll a little bit wonky, but I will let you introduce everyone to a little bit of the user interface.
Okay, so this is.
You just press this guy. There we go. Oh, there we go. That one.
Okay, so this is our user interface, and it's where kind of how we operate the SEM. So up here we have the on and off button for the beam. Very important.
It's the main thing.
That is the main thing. And next to it we have different scan speeds. So these basically alter how quick the beam is running across the surface of your sample. And if you have a slower scan speed, you usually get a better image. And then you use faster scan speed just to like move around so that it doesn't take too long loading in. Yeah. We also have the ability to take photos. We can put different detectors in for what we need them for. And I can show you what the inside of the chamber actually looks like.
So we have a little chamber scope inside most of our SEMs. This means that basically we can see what's happening in there. Because there's nothing worse than a mystery science box doing things when you can't see what it's doing. So we have a couple of different things in here at the moment. So this big thing at the top, that's the pole piece. So the electron beam is coming down through here onto our samples. So these are two meteorites next to each other. We've got this one like shored up a little bit so they're roughly the same height. This is our stage. This is what we put the samples on. So this is the bit that actually moves around. We're not moving anything up here. It's the bottom bit that moves around under the electron beam. This is our EDS detector, and this is produced by Oxford Instruments. It's the Ultimax 65, I think. Yep. Just in case anybody particularly cares. And then this is our backscatter electron detector. So we'll give you a little run through about what the different sorts of electron detectors are and what they pick up. Because I think we're going to start off with secondary, and then we'll show you the difference and why we use backscatter a lot for geological purposes. So I will let Cesca take over because I think we're going to start on Mars.
Yes, we are indeed.
Prettier than mine.
It's pretty cool. We love Mars.
So Cesca and I both did our undergrads here. Cesca then did a research master's with us, looking at Martian
meteorites and comparing them to Earth to try and find analog materials or good analog materials.
I work on large igneous asteroids. So I think they're fun.
We do indeed. So this is in the secondary electron detector at the moment. And the secondary electron detector is basically used to look at the topography of a sample. Our samples are polished flat, so there's not a huge amount of variation other than bits of dust that are on top of the sample. So you can't see a huge amount for geological purposes using secondary electron detectors.
If you have things that do have a lot of topography, so pollen is one of our favorites, as you can see on the image on our banner. We've also emblazoned on everything that we own.
Yeah.
The things that are three-dimensional, secondary electron is really, really powerful for that. You get a lot of detail, really high resolution. But because we want to do chemical analysis on our meteorites, we need a flat sample for those detectors to work properly. So unfortunately, secondary electron isn't very useful for us personally.
Yes.
But if you want to flip over into Backscatter.
So here we go. I'll turn the camera off.
The trick with Backscatter is you have to turn the infrared cameras off on the inside, otherwise it gets very upset.
So there we go. So suddenly this becomes a lot more useful to us when looking at geological samples. So this is now looking at the distribution of the elements, or it's looking at the atomic density distribution of elements across the sample.
So atomic number contrast is what we're looking for. So heavy things show up as white. So things like metals, iron, sulfides, they show up as quite bright. Things that are really, really light, like silica or quartz, they show up as dark grays. Everything else is kind of a sliding grayscale in between. And after a while, you get your eye in for what the different shades of gray mean. And if you know your rocks in beforehand, you normally have a pretty good stab at things. So I don't work on Mars. I've actually really rarely ever seen Martian meteorites. Yeah. Most of mine are cheaper, so that's why I work on HEDs. But my immediate reaction would be that this is probably a sulfide or a chromite, something along those lines. This dark grey in the background, I would say probably a feldspar. Pyroxene and olivine. Cool.
Well done.
So this is what we do. So a lot of our work is looking at our knowledge of how igneous rocks work on Earth, and then applying that to asteroids and other planets. Because geology happens the same, basically the same everywhere. There's only so much you can do to a lava, it turns out. And most rocks in space that are igneous are also basalts, so it's actually quite handy for us.
It is very handy, especially on Mars. Some of the basalts, or a lot of the basalts on Mars, There are no plate tectonics, so it works. Volcanism on Mars works in a similar way to how it does on Hawaii, where it just goes through the crust and there's no kind of subducting plate that's
nothing mixing everything together. So what is a basalt? Basalts are probably the easiest sort of igneous rock to make. They are the very first sort of stage. So if you imagine like the lavas that come running out of Hawaii and Iceland, those nice runny ones, that's a basalt. So they're really fine grained, really dark. They're made up of silica, pyroxene, olivine, which are kind of like the building blocks and the first things to crystallize because they have really high crystallization temperatures. So if you melt something from Earth's mantle and you bring it up through the crust, it's going to produce a basalt. And turns out every planet produces basalt and large asteroids. I think there's a study that came out a couple of years ago that said you can have igneous activity on anything above 20 kilometers in diameter, in radius, which isn't very big at all. Whereas the asteroid I work on is 500 kilometers in diameter. So that is verging on planet territory, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
So basalts are the most common igneous rock. They're the easiest to produce and they are everywhere throughout the solar system, even on planets that don't exist anymore. So a lot of meteorites record planetary bodies that are no longer a single unit. Sorry. So a lot of them got blown apart through impact processes in the early solar system. So we've got lots of little fragments, but we don't have a whole planet to look at. But what we do from these fragments, this is why we work on meteorites, is we can start reconstructing that history and work out what used to be there and what used to be happening. Because Earth is very, very different to every other planet in the solar system and other planets that we found so far. So understanding meteorites is a key part of understanding how the solar system happened, really, and why Earth turned out so different.
Yeah, especially when meteorites are naturally delivered to us. We don't have to go out and get them.
Which is very useful.
Well, we do have to go out and search for them, but
somebody finds them on the ground.
Yeah.
They at least make it to the right planet.
Yeah, definitely. And hopefully in future years, we'll have some more samples collected from the surface of another planetary body and brought to us. We've already got that with Riguru, Bennu, and the moon. And hopefully with Perseverance rover collecting samples on Mars, we'll get those at some point.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
I need to remember which one of these computers has the right time on it because they're all different.
Yeah, I think it's that one.
I think so.
Okay, so this meteorite is called Tissint and it is a Sherga-type meteorite. So Tissint is a fall meteorite that fell, its fall or fireball was observed by lots of different people in Northwest Africa. And it fell in July 2011. And it wasn't until October that it was collected. So
it's still quite new.
Yeah, still relatively new in comparison to some of the other meteorites that could be sat there for years before you pick them up. And it's called Tissint because that was the closest town that it was named after.
So meteorites get named geographically. You can't do any proper science on a meteorite and publish anything on it. Sorry, I'm just driving well.
That's all right, go ahead.
Was until they've been officially classified, which is part of what we do here at the university. And we work with a couple of local collectors and meteorite dealers, and we classify brand new meteorites. So it's basically working out what sort of meteorite they are, what they're made out of, and then they can be used for other things.
Yeah, and there are loads of different types of Martian meteorites. They were previously referred to as the SNCs. So there was the Shergatites, Narcolites, and Chassignites, which all have different textural characteristics and geochemical characteristics, which can like distinguish between the groups. Shergatites are by far the most common. I think last time I checked, there are about 286, I think.
You say that like that's common. There's over 2,000 HEDs.
Yeah, well, there's only 340 Martians. So it's common, relatively common in the Martian meteorites. And this one in particular is olivine ferric, and that's because you have big crystals of olivine in it, which Jen is now showing you.
Like this one?
Yeah, so it's an olivine ferric Shergatite, and they are one of the most common Martian meteorites, like that are similar to terrestrial or Earth basalts. So that's what I'm really interested in, because I compare these to terrestrial basalts to see how similar they are.
Actually, whilst we're here and we're just driving around a little bit, I'll explain what some of these things at the bottom here mean. So this one is just which detector we're using, and a couple of different options. So secondary detector, and that's the one that shows you the sample topography. This is the backscatter all, that's what the A stands for, and that just means it's using all the diodes on the backscatter electron detector to show us what basically where the different minerals are. There's a couple of different options for the other backscatter ones that we don't really use for geology. So I'm not going to get into them today because we'll be here forever. This is our accelerating voltage. This is how many volts are coming out of the electron beam. So at the moment we're at 15,000, which is pretty standard for geology. We tend to use 15,000 or 20,000. And the reason we use those values is because different elements have different sort of excitation values. So we need ideally twice as many kilovolts as the excitation energy of the elements we're looking for. It's a little bit more leeway with newer detectors or a bit more sensitive. So for us, we're interested in things typically up to, say, nickel. That's got an excitation energy of about 7.4 kilovolts. So we use 15 because then it means it will definitely measure that. The working distance is just where the beam is focused to, and 10 millimeters is where our EDS detector, which is the chemical analysis we'll introduce you to in a little bit, that's where that's focused to, so we try and match those up. This is your magnification, so if Cesca zooms in and out, you'll see this number change, and you'll also see this bar at the side change here. This is our scale bar. So micron is a thousandth of a millimeter, I think. I should know. I say this every time I do MicroscopyLIVE, I don't know the check in between. So you'll see this update as we go, and then of course the field of view at the bottom is just telling you how big this entire image is. This is a sliding scale of probe currents. It's basically just how much power we're putting into the electron beam. You don't need to worry about it too much. We worry about it, but not a huge amount. This just means it's in high vacuum, and this is just the sort of lens combination that we're using. So the only things to really worry about is this one, is the magnification, because that's the cool one, because these go up ridiculously high.
Yeah, I think the highest magnification they got, they ended up being able to pick something up that's like 0.7
nanometers. There's a resolution of 0.7 nanometers per pixel, which is ridiculous. We don't do that for geology.
Yeah.
But I actually don't know how high this one zooms in. So this one can technically do 1 million times magnification, it turns out. For geology, I rarely go above about 200.
Yeah.
Like that. So it's much more important for biology and
definitely.
Probably like the materials engineering world actually to get really high mag. For us, it's less of an issue.
Yeah, definitely.
So if you want to find something cool in there, Cesca, we'll introduce everyone to EDS.
Good. Okay. So
otherwise, if you have any questions, just let us know in the chat and we will answer them live, or something that you particularly want to see in these rocks. If there's something that we've zoomed past that you think is interesting, just let us know.
Here you go. I'll zoom in on this big olivine crystal here.
Nice.
Okay.
Yeah. Nice and chunky.
There we go. I'll just check the focus is okay.
Yep. So a key part of SEM analysis is making sure the electron beam is focused properly. So if you make it really unfocused and show everyone the difference. Have similar Earth basalts to Mars basalts. That is Cesca's entire master's project.
Exactly what I studied for my master's. So turns out very, very similar. So a lot of the geology works the same, basically, like everywhere. So a lot of the processes that we see on Earth and the different minerals and geochemistries that they produce, that actually can be replicated quite well on Mars. So one of the samples that I looked at in particular was a sample from New Mexico. And the olivine compositions, the pyroxene compositions, all the minerals that make up a basalt, they were all really, really similar in geochemistry to the Martian meteorites, which was really cool. And I wasn't expecting it to be as similar as it was. So yeah.
So whilst you're getting all nice and focused, could you explain why it is that you're comparing Earth basalts to Martian basalts?
Yes. So I compare Martian basalts to Earth basalts because space agencies have samples called analog materials, which basically try and replicate rocks on another planetary body. And they do this so that they can test spacecraft and test just things that are going onto another planetary surface and interacting with rocks on another planetary surface to make sure that they can work okay, make sure the functions are all functioning as good as they can do, so that when they get there, there's more chance of a success in a mission. And so having materials that are very similar are really useful for that. You can make some. There are materials called simulants, and you can actually make them replicate another planetary body, but it's a lot easier when it's already there for you. So that's what I tried to do with my research.
Yeah, so Cesca's just slowed the scan speed down there, which is why the image is loading in a little
Yeah.
bit slowly. But you do get a nice crisp image out of it. So as this one loads in, you'll see how the image neatens up, then gets sharper. That's because we're spending a little bit longer on every point with the electron beam, so you get a better signal and you get a nice clean image.
There you go.
Ready for some EDS?
Yes,
Do some EDS
ready
mapping.
indeed.
Right.
Here we go.
Remember this picture, it will reappear shortly. I will stop that share, and then I will share this one.
So we're working with two screens at the moment, so we're trying to like make sure that we can.
We're balancing everything around. So this is Oxford Instruments Aztec software, and this is how we do our chemical analysis. So we'll start off with EDS mapping because that's the most fun.
Yeah,
so EDS is energy dispersive spectroscopy. So what's happening is as the electron beam hits the sample, it's knocking some electrons out and others are infilling those electron shells, releasing energy in the process and releasing X-rays. Each of those X-rays has a set energy that is related to a particular element. This does some sort of wizardry that then reconstructs that into actual useful data in terms of numbers or images. So it basically runs at the same time as the SEM does. So we start off by pulling across the image that we had previously. So as this one loads in.
There we go.
Probably could have done with a quicker part scan speed, but I will.
Yeah.
Fine. Very nice. So because we're in backscattering, so you've got lots of different phases. So we can start picking out some ideas of what things might be just based on the grayscales and our own knowledge of geology and what these samples are.
You can indeed.
But what we can do with EDS is, whilst we can generate data on individual points, we can tell exactly where we want data from. What's prettier is if we tell it to actually do it in a map. So it maps across the entire sample and starts assigning elements.
Yeah.
So he'll start, this will hopefully start. It's the wrong button. There we go. Construct maps. Now, why is that not working? What have I done, Cesca? I've clearly forgotten to do something.
Primary detector. Is that the right primary detector?
Yep, U65. The other one is the extreme.
Oh, yeah.
It's very on brand for me. Come into like anything. I think I'm horribly prepared.
Yeah. Go back to requirement data.
It's always great when your line manager's helping you out in the chat. Find that data.
Settings.
Settings. Still stop. 2 frames. Oh, looks fine. Stop that cue. There we go. Of course. Oh, it's doing. Oh, I know what it's doing. So, Aztec has a fun little quirk sometimes where it doesn't always load in the maps first time around. So you might be able to make out there is a very thin green band coming down this image. That is where it's up to the mapping points. This will run through to the first frame and then it will load in all the pictures afterwards. Yeah, let's see. And if it doesn't work, we will restart Aztec and see what happens. Yeah.
So whilst it's loading, I don't know if you can see my mouse here.
Yes.
Yep, you can. Okay, so this big crystal here, this is what we call an olivine, and we can tell you why once we show you what elements are present in there. And you can kind of make out that it's quite dark towards the middle of the olivine, and then towards the outside of the crystal, it gets a bit lighter. And this is a feature that's quite common in the olivine ferric shergatites, and it's to do with the magmatic kind of the processes that happened during the crystallization of the rock.
You'll see this a lot in terrestrial rocks as well. Compositional zoning is pretty common. There we go.
Hey,
there it is.
There you go. And as you can see from the color difference as well, there's definitely a change in the elements that are present as you go towards the outer rim of the crystal.
So we're no longer just relying on different grayscales. We can now assign different elements different colors. We'll zoom this out so you can see a couple more maps. All of these get exported as individual things. We can layer them up. Do you have a color scheme that you like for Mars?
I do. Here we go. Oh,
everyone has a color scheme for their own sorts of rocks for certain things. So I have one that I use for my rocks, which looks really ugly on anything that isn't isn't from Vesta actually.
Yeah, it's always funny, like looking at someone else's color scheme as well when you're so used to your own, because you got to try and work out what minerals they suddenly look a different color, and it's like,
Yeah.
We do like a teal for calcium.
I do orange.
Do you?
I do orange for calcium.
Orange is usually my titanium.
My titanium's
But
red.
sulfur's always yellow.
Sulfur has to be yellow because sulfur is yellow.
Yeah.
That's the only rule. I don't think I've actually come across anyone who doesn't have sulfur as yellow yet.
Really?
Yeah. I think it's because sulfur itself is such a strong color.
Yeah. I can't remember.
I don't think chromium is pink.
Yeah.
Your phosphorus pink though.
It is. But my calcium would be more important there because it means appetite. So it's calcium and phosphorus. So it should be fine.
Do you normally keep oxygen on in there?
No, I don't. I think I didn't turn it on either. There we go. Cool. So is that finished loading? Yes, it has. So
go back to this one, so it's a little bit bigger for you.
Okay. So actually it's probably best to go here so I can show the individual maps.
To shrink the spectra. So whenever we collect map data, we also get a spectra across the whole area. The spectra are less useful across whole areas just because there's lots of different minerals happening in there.
Yeah.
And one thing to note with spectra, if you're ever looking at them like this, how tall the peak is doesn't really mean anything. It's just how strong the signal is, how many counts per second it's getting. So I'll tell you, like, yes, there is a lot of something in here. The actual peak itself isn't telling you anything quantitative. That's where the numbers come in. That's where all the maths wizardry comes in to actually work out exactly what is in there.
Yeah. Yeah, so in this zoned olivine that you can see here, it's red in the middle, so magnesium rich, if you can see on the right hand side, and it goes towards iron, being more iron rich as you go to the rim of the crystal. And so that's basically when the olivine crystallized. It's one of the first minerals to crystallize in a basaltic melt at the highest temperatures, at very high pressures, and quite like deep depths. So this is usually when it pools at like the bottom of the crust on Mars. And yeah, so it's one of the first minerals to crystallize, and it's quite big because it has a lot of, it's hotter temperature, higher pressure, it has a lot more time. It's very slow crystallization, so it's got time to grow big.
So generally in geology, the bigger things are, the longer it's taken.
Yeah, yeah. And usually when they crystallize, the first minerals are very magnesium rich. So that is why we've got the magnesium rich center in the middle. But as crystallization progresses, the melt gets gradually more iron rich, and so the olivine becomes more iron rich. And this is why the olivine above here, where my mouse is now, is greener. It crystallized later on in the crystallization stages of the Martian lava.
And these are things what happening billions of years ago?
Billions of years ago, yeah. So Shergottites, I can't remember the age of this one specifically. I think it's like 460 million years ago was Tissin, crystallization age. 110 for most meteorites. But yeah, so this happened millions of years ago, and as of these, the zoning can basically give you an idea of the processes that have happened in
so you can kind of record how igneous melts are changing composition over time.
Yeah.
So this is very similar to what happens on Earth. Zoned crystals like this are really, really common in our igneous rocks. But they're actually less common on asteroids.
Oh, there you go.
Don't get as much zoning in HEDs, which is what I work on. So for me, it's great seeing this because I never get to look at it.
Yeah, definitely. It's always very pretty.
It is nice, satisfying.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you want to find one more fun thing in Europe before we move across to?
Yes, I will.
We'll stop that share. In the meantime, sharing. I will restart Aztec and see if I can get it to stop being silly.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. We're back on the SEM now. I think you guys can see.
Yes.
That's perfect.
Right, I'm just going to restart Aztec and see if I can get it to load in properly first time around.
Yeah.
As always, SEMs work best if you just turn them off and on again sometimes. Like the Narcotites, our Shergottites thought to have all come from the same region on Mars. What degree of alteration assemblages do we see in Shergottites? Me asking you. So are all Shergottites thought to come from the same region on Mars?
So No. So the shergatites, you can get different types of shergatites. So you can get depleted shergatites. There's intermediate shergatites that are normally grouped in with the enriched shergatites. And this is thought to be the result of different source regions on Mars. And you can see that in the depletion or enrichment of light rare earth elements. So I wouldn't be able to show this on here because our detectors don't pick up light rare earth elements, but using EPMA?
EPMA, I can do it with WDS.
Yep.
So it's a very similar process, but rather than looking at the energy that's being released by the sample, it looks at the wavelength of the X-rays. So it's a little bit more precise. But the WDS detector that we have doesn't offer mapping in the same way, so it would be less exciting to show you live, unfortunately. It's very much a case of I click a point and then I wait for half an hour.
Yeah.
Which is not ideal for outreach purposes.
Yeah, definitely.
But there are definitely ways to measure that, and it's a pretty common thing in meteoritics.
Yeah, there have been some papers that have introduced the idea that the enrichment of light rare earth elements and shergatites is through the crust, and they've become enriched as they travel through the crust. But most of the ones that I read during my master's was that there were different source regions for shergatite meteorites.
Well, whilst we're driving around, I've got another question for you.
Yes.
Actually, you could probably find an example of this. Is all the zoning a result of crystallization, or do you get shock processes that are also
Yeah, so the interesting thing about pyroxenes in
my favorite mineral.
Martian shergatites, and one of the things that I struggled the most with in my master's is that they have really, really patchy zoning. You can kind of make it out here.
We can run a quick map over that.
We can run a quick map. But you've got areas of kind of like lighter areas around here, darker areas here. And that is the result of shock. So rather than it being kind of magmatic processes that have formed the zoning in pyroxenes, it's often like shock metamorphism and stuff like that. Another way you can tell that the meteorite is really shocked is the darker areas to the like bottom and top right of the corner. Those are feldspars, and well, they were feldspars. Yeah, so they have been shock metamorphosed into a mineral called Masculinite, which has pretty similar composition to plagioclase, or just any sort of feldspar. Well, no, plagioclase. But when you look at them under an optical microscope, they don't have any of their optical features that you would normally see. Like there's usually you see twinning. It's kind of like looks like a barcode when you're looking at it under a microscope. You don't see that under the optical microscope. It's just glass. So
doing it again. So I'm running in the background. I'm running a map over this. So once it loads in with the pictures, we'll show you.
Yeah.
Actually, what we could do after this, if we go across to my meteor, because I've got some very different shock features.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. So like shock presents itself in lots of different ways, lots of different bodies. So
for those of you who aren't familiar with what we mean by shock processes and shock metamorphism, to get a meteorite off an asteroid or off a planet, you have to hit it with another rock, typically quite hard. The early solar system was a really, really violent place. There were lots of things flying around, lots of things hitting each other quite violently.
Yeah.
So what happens is when you do hit those two rocks together at several kilometers per second, often you get this really high sort of like spike in pressure. You get a really high temperature spike. So you end up with like all these sort of phases of minerals and features that you wouldn't get in any other way. So typically terrestrial metamorphism is a slow process. It takes time. Shock metamorphism is quick. It happens basically immediately, and we will now show you the map on the screen.
There you go.
Ta-da!
I will.
I'll let Cesca turn everything back into the colours that she likes.
Oh, wrong button.
So this is zoning in a pyroxene now rather than an olivine. So they're very similar
Yes.
compositions. They're both iron magnesium silicates, but they have slightly different amounts of oxygen and different crystal structures. Whilst compositionally they're very similar, they are definitely different things.
Yeah.
Pyroxenes are my favourite mineral.
They are indeed.
I'm a big fan.
Big fan of pyroxenes.
What's your favourite mineral?
I like an olivine.
Yeah,
I'm basic.
boring. Only 2 N members, Cesca.
I know, but it's so good. You can tell so much.
That picks up quite nicely, actually.
Yeah.
How do you choose your favourite mineral? I feel it in my heart and my
Yeah,
soul.
I just really like how much you can tell from olivines. I think it's really cool.
I think pyroxenes are very useful. Again, they're incredibly common. And on the rocks that I work on, pyroxenes are the most dominant mineral, but there's a lot of variation within them, and they're stripy sometimes, which I enjoy.
Yes, yeah, the stripy pyroxenes are very cool.
So you can see in these pyroxenes here, we've kind of got some weird sort of patchy and blocky zoning.
Yeah. Yeah, so as I was explaining before, it presents itself in lots of different ways in Martians, but the patchy zoning was definitely one that I stumbled across a lot when I was doing my master's. So you've got the magnesium rich kind of areas, you've got iron rich areas. In some meteorites we also have calcium rich, so I don't know if you can see around here, it's a little bit more teal in comparison to the kind of green that you see in iron.
Trust us, it is there.
It is there. But yeah, and you can kind of see it over here as well in the individual maps. So you've got areas that are calcium rich, but those areas, well, not so much there because it's pyroxene, but plagioclase, but you've got areas that are calcium rich over here, but areas that are iron rich over here, and then magnesium rich cores. So yeah, it's
shock zoning takes a little bit more unraveling, unfortunately. It's a little bit more complicated.
Yeah.
Is this quite typical for shock in Martian meteorites?
Yeah, it is. I've
Nice.
seen it in all of them, all of the ones I looked at anyway. But yeah, shall we move on to
shall we
Vesta?
look at some other shock features? I don't know where it is in the sample chamber, so we will drive over.
Yeah.
Cesca very kindly loaded up all my samples for me today. I'm just outsourcing.
There we go. So I think you can see.
Yep, we're all good.
I see him. Perfect.
We'll zoom out.
Should be over here if I remember correctly.
Okay. So the 8 meteorites I work on are compositionally very similar. It's all the same sorts of minerals.
There
it is. But the ones I work on have come from a large asteroid. Actually, perfect.
Oh, there it
That's
is.
exactly what I needed. There you go.
That was on purpose.
I get focused on that guy.
Yeah.
So I work on an asteroid called Vesta, and the meteorites I work on are HEDs. These are Howardites, eucrites, and diogenites. So eucrites are basalt lavas, so very similar to stuff that comes out of Hawaii. Same sort of composition stuff we get out of Mars. Again, sort of like the good old basic, here is your first igneous rock, it's the basalt. Diogenites are a little bit more complicated in terms of what they are, but in terms of minerals, they are just orthopyroxene with a little bit of olivine. And then Howardites are a mechanical mixture of the two. So this meteorite is Northwest Africa 6414. It's one of the first ones we officially classified here in the lab. And it is my current pet project. Lucky me. So this is what we call a polymixed breccia. So a breccia is a mixture of different rocks that have been stuck together to form a new rock. So on Earth, you get them through volcanics or sort of like structural deposits that have been an earthquake that get broken up. In space, they are a combination of things been blasted apart and sort of mixed together. So this one probably formed in an ejecta blanket. So lots of different fragments of rock that have been sort of stuck back together again and then eventually kicked off the asteroid for a second time. So I think the last time I checked, I have about, I want to hazard about 25 different individual types of rock in this meteorite, bearing in mind it's only about 2 centimeters long. So that's why it's taken me a long time to write this paper. But this is what shock looks like in HED. So this is, rather than getting sort of the patchy zoning, we get whatever this is. So this is a basalt class. So same mineral. So that dark gray is feldspar. That light gray is pyroxene. There's no olivine in this sample. Very little olivine on Vesta, so I really only have to worry about pyroxenes, which is why they're my favorite mineral. And we've got this dark stuff in here, that's a silica phase, and then this light stuff is troilites, that's an iron sulfide. So whereas in Mars we get like that nice patchy zoning, here I get shock recrystallization. So there's a nucleation point. Oh, we'll speed up, we'll zoom in. So you get these sort of like very fine sort of crystalline mixings. And there is zoning in between that. So that's typically what I end up looking at, is things that are much less pretty, but I would say equally as important.
Yeah.
They mean things. I'll zoom out a little bit. There are some plaque types in here as well, actually. Let's see if I can remember where they are. That's a class of a breccia in a breccia. So this is a very complicated rock. So you can see already compared to the Martian one, there is much more happening in here. Lots of different crystals, all sorts. That's actually a nice unshocked class, which is rare. Yeah. And somewhere around here, there's a really nice symplectite, which is, there it is. I've been looking at this rock for ages, so I do know where everything is in it. So this is probably, I don't know how many symplectites you get in Martian rocks, actually.
I haven't seen many, to be fair. I don't think I've seen any, actually, in the meteorites I've looked at.
So I'm just getting it in focus at the moment. That's about right. We'll turn the contrast down, turn the brightness down, make it a little bit nicer. I'm not wearing my glasses, actually, so I can't tell if it's in focus.
No, I don't think it is.
Great. So that says there are lots of symplectites in Martian meteorites, but they're not as common. Cool. So a symplectite is an unmixing effect. So basically what's happened is, I'll slow that scan speed down. So what's happened is there's been this crystal originally has been hit really hard and it's unmixed. So whereas it might used to have been sort of a typical eucrite composition with sort of olivine, pyroxene, feldspar, and sort of the other accessory phases that we get. Accessory phases are just minerals that are less common. They're in small amounts, but still there. So instead what I have now is, well, I think it's feldspar, pyroxene, phaolite, which is the iron-rich end member of olivine. And what I'm thinking is probably troilite and silica. But this rock is full of these, and they're all very different from each other, which is super fun for me. Cool too. See if I can find something fun that'll make like a nice little map to show the differences between Martians and HEDs. So your shagotite was quite coarse grained, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
I think somewhere in here there is like a nice clast of a basalt. That's probably this big guy. I wonder if I've got any exsolution in this one. Yeah, a little bit, not very much. So this is a typical texture for eucrites. So these are the Vestan basalts as opposed to the Martian basalts. There's already a difference in the shape of the crystals. So there's lots of different textures that come under the basalt umbrella. But this one has these really nice plagioclase laths, these nice long crystals. And that's really, really common in these rocks. And it's because these cool down quite quickly. You can see the grain size is much smaller on these ones. These are maybe only 200-300 micron across. So these are much, much finer. If you were looking at a rock made entirely out of this with your naked eye, you probably wouldn't be able to tell the different crystals apart. And that's really, really common on Vesta. Smaller body. These formed really early, sort of first couple billion years in the solar system. So I think most HEDs we typically assume are sort of around the 4.5 to 3.8 billion year sort of age category. So these are older than the ones that we were looking at previously. But a fun feature about HEDs that I really enjoy is that the pyroxenes are stripy, and I think this is one. Yeah.
Hey.
Oh, it's not the best one. That's a better crystal. No, wrong way. Let's see. There is some nice exsolution in here, but it's all in like tiny little crystals, unfortunately, because it's a breccia. That's quite a nice one. So we saw we had got lots of zoning in the Martian meteorite. We don't get as much zoning in the HED pyroxenes. Makes crystal stripy. About to get into that. This is one of my favorite features. So this is what we call exsolution. So it's an unsolidus, it's a subsolidus unmixing. So basically what's happening is the pyroxene, as it's been heated up and it's cooled down again, some elements in there and some cations are able to move around the crystal structure. So we have a typical sort of pyroxene composition. It's probably pigeonite. It gets heated up again. So there's a period of metamorphism on Vesta that got up to about 1,000 degrees. That's enough to heat up pyroxenes, not enough to melt them, but enough to start getting some movement around in their crystal structure. So you end up with these stripes of high and low calcium pyroxene, which I will pull across into Eds tag. And this is very, very common. I have yet to see anything from Vesta that doesn't have exsolution somewhere. Sometimes they can be really, really big stripes. Sometimes they can be super, super tiny, to the point where I was trying out the extreme detector, which is a really, really sensitive detector. And that picked up exsolution I hadn't even noticed before because it was less than a micron in width.
Yeah.
It was minuscule.
It looks like there's some teeny tiny exsolution within the exsolution.
Yeah, there is. So the orientation of exsolution is controlled by the crystal structure. So sometimes you can get multiple stages of exsolution where you'll end up with them sort of like crossing over each other. It's called herringbone exsolution, much like herringbone fabric, which is quite nice. As this runs through, actually we'll start sharing that screen preemptively. Then we'll share this one again. There we go. So once this runs through to the end, it'll bump in all the different colors and you'll see that these are very different compositions. They're all pyroxene, but they are very different compositions to each other. But it's a really common feature. You can kind of use exsolution to estimate temperatures. So the idea is, like with crystallization, the bigger things are in geology, the longer it's taken. So if you have really big, thick bands of exsolution, it's probably taken longer to form, which is quite nice.
Yeah.
I think there was a paper in the 90s where they estimated cooling rate and therefore depth based on exsolution, which was pretty cool. Because all the different eukaryotes show different things. So there's what, 300 or so Martian meteorites in total?
340, yeah.
There are 1,600 eukaryotes.
Wow. Imagine having that many rocks.
Change some of these colors. So I've got a different color scheme to Cesca, but it works for the rocks that I work on. Blue. Oh no, calcium. My calcium's orange. Iron is green because it just has to be.
Always green.
And I do magnesium as kind of like a teal blue color. Yeah, that'll do. They're all the important minerals. So you can see in this calcium map in particular, we've got these stripes of this really calcium-rich pyroxene. So this is what we call an augite exsolution lamellae. So whilst the bulk of the rock itself is still pretty much unchanged, you get these really cool sort of striker patterns in them. And they're everywhere in my sort of rocks, actually. And the other piece of this meteorite I have, there's some really, really fun ones that I don't understand yet. So they're in a really unusual layout that I don't fully get. But this is a really, really common feature. And this purple in my color scheme is feldspar. The green is pyroxene. So the green is a low calcium pyroxene. The orange is a high calcium pyroxene. And there's lots of other stuff in here as well, which we won't get into because I'm still trying to get my head around it half the time, I think. We've got about 10 minutes left. So is there anything in particular that people have questions about or that people really want to see in these rocks? Or are you happy for us just to find something that we think is cool? All right. What is my favorite part of this rock?
Yeah.
As always, just pop your questions in the chat. I keep forgetting you zoom out all the way. It takes you all the way out here.
I know.
How was the sample matched to Vesta? So we're fortunate that there are a lot of HEDs. There's been a lot of work on oxygen isotopes. So by measuring the different ratios of oxygen atoms, oxygen isotopes, you can assign them to different parent bodies. So all the things from Vesta have the same oxygen isotope signature. Different parent bodies have different oxygen isotope signatures. So once you've got that down, that sort of gives you a basic sort of guideline. For HEDs in particular, they have a certain set of compositions and textures that we see. There are some that are anomalous. So we have rocks that look very similar to this, but have really different oxygen isotope signatures. So we know that there was similar processes happening somewhere else in the solar system. But for the most part, if it's made up out of this, oh, there it was. That was the interesting bit I was looking for. If it's made up of a particular set of minerals and has a particular sort of feature, you can generally hazard a pretty good guess that it's from Vesta. And also they're the most common sorts of achondrites. So if it is a basalt from space, it's probably from Vesta, which is pretty handy for us. Right, this will be a challenge for me to focus because historically I'm very bad at doing that. Actually, let's see if we can get the working distance back down to 10. And we'll do the sticks on this. One day I will learn, and I should wear my glasses for MicroscopyLIVE so I can do this properly. No, that's definitely worse. Speaking of,
yeah.
So all I'm doing at that moment is I'm just trying different dials, different things, and changing the shape of the beam, changing where it's focusing to try and get it as good as possible, which is clearly a struggle for me today. Oh.
Hey. Nice.
I'm probably still like a little bit out of focus, but better.
Definitely better.
Yeah. So something else that we often find in meteorites, so is along with shock metamorphic processes where we're changing big crystals, we also end up with little pockets of shock melt. So that high pressure, that high temperature spike basically just melts these things, and then because space is cold, they also quench really quickly. So this is an example of a shock melt. So we have these nice sort of, we call them triple junctions, where you have 3 crystals joined together at 120-degree angles. That's a really common feature for things that are cooling quickly. And we've got this really, really tiny exsolution in here as well. And often these little melt pockets only form in sort of like small areas. So this is quite a large melt pocket class, generally, but it's nice.
Yeah.
So it gives you kind of like a snapshot of the different things that are making up these rocks. That's a nice,
Look at that.
a nice train. So this is, again, it's going to be pyroxene, it's going to be feldspar with some high-density things. I'm going to say maybe even chromite this time around. Let's find out. Let's pull this one across into Aztec. Oh, new site. There we go. This is another thing that's quite common in these rocks. You can still get a lot of variation in impact melts, but they're always quite nice to find. I think they look cool.
They do look cool.
And it's nice to kind of get like a little snapshot of what happened very fast, very long ago. And like not just fast for geology time, but like actually fast. So things that we think are quick could be like a million years.
Yeah.
So geology itself is great because it already warps your sense of time, but then you can start doing space rocks and suddenly your millions of years turn into billions of years.
Yeah.
So like all the HEDs we think are several billion years old. There's a study recently that said there's only 5 impact events or so recorded in the HED meteorite collection, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's cool.
So Vesta is a great little asteroid. I say little asteroid, it's the biggest asteroid, it's the second biggest asteroid, the biggest igneous asteroid after Ceres. And it's got a huge hole taken out the bottom of it. There are 2 massive overlapping impact basins at the bottom. So probably a good bet is that a lot of stuff came from that.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of bodies are covered in craters. Earth is also covered in craters. It's just we've got plants in the way.
Yeah.
But also because we have active tectonics, a lot of them have been sort of destroyed and covered up over time. So rather than having billions of years just to sit there and look pretty, Earth has been busy and has destroyed a lot of evidence we have. But we still have things like Barringer Crater,
Yeah, definitely.
sub-re-impact structure, that's enormous. Friend 4 is huge. Chicxulub.
Yeah. Crater counting is also a massive way that a lot of people create the geological timescales or like separate the geological timescales on other planetary bodies. So they did that for Mars, they did that for the Moon.
They tried it for Vesta, but depending on if you count for the Moon or Mars or the light heaven above, you get very different ages for everything.
Yeah.
So I can't remember what people decided on eventually. Yeah, I think they worked out, if you, depending on how you count, you could either have the 2 big impact basins at the bottom could either be 3 billion years old or 1 billion years old, which is a big shift.
Yeah.
I mean, very different things. Just change these into the right colors so they are useful.
Yes. You have a question?
Is there ground ice on Vesta and does this affect the petrology? Vesta is phenomenally dry. Even in terms of hydrated mineral phases, there's barely anything. It is spectacularly dry, actually. So often we find ground ice and sort of like water as water in the outer solar system beyond what we call the snow line. So the Winchcombe meteorite, the one that landed in the UK last year, that's a carbonaceous chondrite. That's from that outer solar system bit. So there is hydrated material in there. We get hydrated minerals, we get lots of clays, as well as things like amino acids and building blocks for life. In the inner solar system, everything's been cooked. So whilst there is ice on Mars, there's no evidence of ice on Vesta. There are some rare bits of carbonaceous material from meteorites coming in from the inner solar system and landing on Vesta, and sometimes if we're lucky we get them in breccias from Vesta, but nothing on Vesta itself is generating water or anything that isn't just rock, really. Ceres, the biggest asteroid though, that is an icy salty mud ball. So that's been very exciting. So the NASA mission that went to Ceres went via Vesta. That's why we know so much about it. So NASA's Dawn mission spent a long time orbiting Ceres, getting lots of data about that, and actually stayed there for a couple extra years longer, which was very exciting for us. So we have a whole 2 minutes left. So if you have
Nice.
any last minute questions, now is the time.
Yeah.
As a reminder, later on today, hopefully, you'll get a summary booklet of the data we've collected today with a little explanation about what we've done. You'll also get a link to the video. You'll get a link to the quiz. And I think that's
everything.
kind of it. So we hope you've enjoyed this. Thank you very much for coming. The next one is the last Friday of November, so the 25th of November, same time, same place, or maybe a different microscope. We haven't decided yet.
No, you haven't indeed.
And we'll be looking at mushrooms and fungus.
Yes, very highly requested.
It was actually one of the most highly requested things, and we thought we'd save it for winter, so for autumn, so it's thematically
Very
appropriate.
seasonal.
How we're going to do it, we're not quite sure yet. We've got lots of different techniques we could use, lots of different things we could do. We might outsource and get someone else in from the university to come do it with us. If you do have any suggestions about things you'd like for future Microscopy Live events, just let us know. Drop us an email, fill in the forms. And thank you very much for coming.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Hope you've enjoyed it. We've had a nice time.
Yeah, I've had a great time.
Nice getting things going again.
Yeah.
Nice doing space rocks as well. Actually.
Yeah, very nice doing space rocks. Something we can talk very much about.
Very much. Well, we shall say goodbye. We shall stop the recording, and I hope everyone has a nice afternoon.
Yes, have a lovely afternoon.
We're on this
over
one.
there.
Bye.
Bye.